The ballroom at the City Grand was suffocating. It was a sea of glittering diamonds, fake smiles, and the low, anxious hum of people desperate to be seen with one another. This was the annual City Bright Gala, the most important philanthropic event of the year. And I, in my simple, dark velvet, off-the-rack dress, was a crow in a flock of peacocks. My husband, Michael, however, was in his element. He was a peacock. As the city's most influential nonprofit consultant, this was his Super Bowl. He glided through the room, his tuxedo perfect, his laugh too loud, his hand on my back not a gesture of affection, but of possession. "Try to look impressed, Naomi," he'd hissed at me in the car. "These are my biggest clients. Your job tonight is to be quiet, smile, and not, be you." Before we get into this, if you believe that a person's strength isn't measured by how loudly they speak, but by the weight of their actions, I need you to subscribe. We tell stories for the silent, the strong, and the strategic. Hit that subscribe button, and let's get into the story. My name is Naomi King. I am 42 years old. To my husband, I am a charity case. An artist who doesn't sell, a quiet, bookish woman he saved from a life of obscurity. He married me, he loves to tell people, because my simple nature grounded his high-flying, ambitious one. The truth is very different. We were standing near the main dais, and I saw an empty chair. The night was long, and my feet ached. I made the mistake of moving toward it. Michael's hand gripped my arm, his fingernails digging into my skin, his smile never leaving his face as he schmoozed with a passing councilman. At the banquet, my husband whispered, "Sit down, honey, this place is for classy people." His voice was a low, venomous purr in my ear, a perfect counterpoint to the bright smile he was giving the room. It was a brutal, public execution, delivered with the intimacy of a kiss. He was telling me that I, his wife, was not classy enough to even stand near the stage. I was an embarrassment. I smiled and stayed quiet. I didn't just smile. I gave him the look I had perfected over a decade of marriage, the small, apologetic, "You're right, dear" wince. I was his shadow, his simple wife. He had no idea that a shadow is where all the real work gets done. He turned back to the crowd, basking in their light, having put his common wife back in her place. He had no idea what was about to happen. You see, I am not Naomi King, the failed artist. I am the monarch. I am the anonymous, enigmatic founder of the Monarch Foundation, the largest private philanthropic fund in the country. This gala? This City Bright Gala? It was my event. The nonprofits my husband consulted for? They were my grantees. The classy people he was so desperate to impress? They were all here, sipping champagne that my money had paid for, hoping for a sliver of my attention. My husband, Michael, was not a consultant. He was a parasite. And he was skimming. For 2 years, he had been using his consulting firm, a shell corporation, to submit fake, wildly inflated invoices to my own grantees, who, fearing they would lose the monarch's, funding, paid him out of their operating budgets. He was stealing from the city's most vulnerable. He was stealing my money, right under my nose, and then using it to buy the suits he wore to call me not classy. And this, tonight, was the hidden secret suspense: he was about to be fired, exposed, and ruined. All in one night. This wasn't a party for me. It was a counterattack. My simple, quiet life was a lie. It was the greatest stay and investigate operation of my life. I hadn't just been painting. I had been gathering evidence, building an airtight case of wire fraud and conspiracy against my own husband. I had an ally. My foundation's actual director, a brilliant, terrifying man named Elias Vance. He was the public face of the monarch. He was the one who really ran the show. And he was standing at the podium right now. Michael was in the front row, looking up at Elias, his face a mask of fawning admiration. He thought Elias was his biggest client. He thought he had the man fooled. He had no idea that Elias was my oldest friend, my co-conspirator, and the man who was about to bring the guillotine down. And so, Elias said, his voice booming over the speakers, we at the Monarch Foundation are thrilled to announce a new, $50 million endowment for the children's literacy program. The room erupted in applause. Michael clapped the loudest, his face beaming. He was already calculating his 15% consulting fee on that $50 million. But, Elias continued, raising a hand. This endowment comes with a new direction. The Monarch Foundation, for the last decade, has been run by me, on behalf of our founder. Tonight, that is changing. The Monarch has decided it is time to step out of the shadows and take a more personal role in her foundation. My husband, Michael, went still. His eyes were glued to the stage. He, like everyone, was craning his neck, expecting a governor, a celebrity, some important person to walk out. Elias smiled. She has been with us all along, gentlemen. She is a woman of profound grace, humility, and a quiet strength that has, frankly, been the engine of this city for a decade. And I am so tired of letting her hide. My husband whispered, sit down, honey. I smiled and stayed quiet. But less than a minute later, Elias looked out, his eyes scanning the crowd, past the politicians, past the billionaires, and they landed directly on me. On the common wife. The broke one. The woman who wasn't classy enough to stand. Everyone in the room stood up and started clapping for me. Ladies and gentlemen, Elias boomed, please rise and join me in honoring the founder, the visionary, the soul of the Monarch Foundation, my friend. Mrs. Naomi King. The silence was a balm. It was a vacuum, a void where all the schmoozing, the laughter, and the clinking glasses had just been. For 3 full seconds, the entire room was frozen in a state of collective, cognitive dissonance. Michael's face was a grotesque masterpiece. The blood had drained from it, leaving a sick, pale, greenish-white mask. His smiling, classy mouth hung open. His eyes, fixed on me, were wide with a terror so pure, so profound, that I almost felt a flicker of pity. He wasn't just shocked. He was unmade. He looked at me, the common wife, the simple artist, and he was finally seeing the monarch. Then, the applause started. It was not the polite, obligatory clapping of a charity gala. It was a roar. It was an explosion of sound from 500 people who, having been fed a mystery for a decade, were now being given the answer. They were clapping for the reveal, for the drama, for the sheer, unbelievable story of it. Naomi. Michael whispered, his voice a dry, dead leaf. What joke is this? He turned, frantic, to Elias, who was still at the podium, beaming at me. Elias. What is this? This is my wife. She's an artist. She's confused. She's an artist, Elias boomed, his voice cutting through the applause. And she is my boss. And she is the woman who has personally signed every grant check this city has seen for 10 years. I took a step forward. And another. I, the woman who had been ordered to sit down, began my walk toward the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. The classy people my husband had worshipped, the councilmen, the billionaires, the old money matriarchs, they were all on their feet, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief, their applause thundering in my ears. I reached the stage. I walked up the small steps. I did not look at my husband, who was still frozen, a statue of his own ruined life, just 10 feet away. I walked directly to Elias. He bowed, kissed my hand, and handed me the microphone. I turned to the crowd. I looked out at the sea of faces, all of them finally seeing me. Thank you, I said. My voice was not the whisper he was used to. It was the clear, strong, confident voice of the monarch, the voice I used to run my foundation, the voice that commanded boardrooms and moved markets. Please, sit. The room slowly, rustlingly, settled. For 10 years, I have operated from the shadows. I believed that the work should speak for itself. I believed that true philanthropy was anonymous. I was wrong. I turned my head, just slightly, and looked directly at my husband. He was watching me, his eyes no longer terrified but narrowing, a cold, reptilian understanding dawning. He was realizing this wasn't a celebration. This was an execution. I was wrong, I repeated, my voice like steel, because my anonymity, my silence, became a shield. A shield for the corrupt. A shield for the greedy. A shield for the parasites who saw my foundation not as a tool for charity, but as a trough to feed from. A nervous murmur went through the crowd. The grantees, the non-profit directors, they were all looking at each other. The Monarch Foundation is, as of tonight, under new management, I announced. My management. Direct management. And my first act as the new, public face of this foundation, is to announce a full, independent audit of every single one of our grantees. A wave of panic. And, I continued, my second act, is to fire my husband. The gasp from the room was so sharp it was almost a scream. Michael took a step back, his face white. Naomi, don't. Don't what, Michael? I asked, my voice dangerously sweet. Don't. Be me? Don't be classy? I turned back to the crowd. My husband, Michael King, is the consultant many of you in this room have been forced to hire to ensure your Monarch grants are renewed. He runs King Consulting, a firm he has assured you is a preferred partner of the Monarch Foundation. I looked at Elias. Elias? Can you confirm? Is King Consulting a preferred partner? Elias stepped up to his own microphone, his face a mask of cold fury. King Consulting is a fraudulent shell corporation. It has no affiliation with the Monarch Foundation. We have never heard of it. That's a lie. Michael roared, his voice finally returning. I manage your grantees. I am your partner. Tell them, Elias. You are a thief, Michael, I said, my voice dropping, but the microphone carried every devastating word. You are a common, greedy, pathetic thief. I nodded to the tech booth. The two massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the City Bright Gala logo, flickered. And then, they showed an invoice. An invoice from King Consulting to the City Youth Shelter, for $150,000. The line item, Strategic Outreach and Synergy Realignment. This, I announced, is a fake invoice. The City Youth Shelter was forced to pay this consulting fee out of the $500,000 grant my foundation gave them last May. A grant that was meant to buy beds for homeless children. The screen flickered again. Another invoice. This time, to the Women's Reentry Program. For $200,000. Line item, Brand Activation and Community Impact Auditing. This, I said, is the money that was supposed to fund their job training program. Instead, it funded. I clicked a remote. The screen changed to a bank statement. A down payment on a new Maserati. My husband's. The room was in an uproar. It was a full-blown scandal. The classy people were looking at Michael like he was a leper. His clients, the non-profit directors, were a mix of pale-faced terror and righteous, furious vindication. You bitch, he hissed, lunging for me, for the microphone. He was desperate. He never made it. Elias, a former college linebacker, didn't even flinch. He simply put a hand the size of a dinner plate on Michael's chest and shoved. Michael went flying backward, crashing into a table of champagne flutes, a pathetic, undignified heap of ruined tuxedo and broken glass. She's lying, he screamed from the floor, as security finally, belatedly, rushed the stage. It's not my fault. She did it. She's the monarch. She's been framing me. It's her signature. He was pointing, his finger shaking, at the screen. At the invoices. You're right, I said, my voice silencing the room again. It is my signature. Or, it's supposed to be. This was the hidden secret. The final, devastating blow. My husband, I explained to the silent, horrified room, was clever. He didn't just skim. He created an entire shadow infrastructure. He needed me on the grants. He told me I was a silent partner in his consulting firm. That my artistic I was a charity asset. He had me sign hundreds of papers over the years. Simple tax forms, honey. Standard operating agreements. Just, sign here. You know you're no good with numbers. I looked at the security guards, who were now holding Michael by the arms. He, like everyone else, thought I was a simple artist. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was not classy. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen changed. It was a split screen. On the left, an invoice from King Consulting, signed, supposedly, by me. On the right, a different document. A grant from the Monarch Foundation, signed by me? No. The signatures were different. The one on the invoice was a careful, deliberate, but ultimately clumsy forgery. The one on the grant was a flowing, powerful, and completely different signature. My husband, I said, is a very, very bad consultant. And an even worse forger. For 10 years, I have lived as two people. Naomi King, the simple wife, and the monarch. And we have never signed our names the same way. I had created my own firewall, my own hidden secret right in plain sight. I had a wife's signature, and I had a CEO signature. And he had, in his arrogance, forged the wrong one. He had proven, on a 50-foot screen, that he had no idea who he was really married to. He hadn't just stolen from the poor. He had committed felony forgery and wire fraud. He's ruined, a woman in the front row whispered, her diamonds glittering. I looked at my husband, my classy husband, now being held, like a common criminal, by security. No, I said, my voice ringing with the finality of a gavel. He's just broke. As if on cue, the main ballroom doors burst open, and 2 uniformed police officers, followed by 2 detectives in suits, walked in. They had been waiting for my signal. They walked past the crowd, past the stage, and right up to my husband. Michael King, the detective said, his voice flat. You are under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud, mail fraud, and forgery. The pillar of the community was cuffed. In his tuxedo. At his own gala. In front of every classy person he had ever wanted to impress. His last look, his last, pleading, terrified look, was at me. I just smiled. And I stayed quiet. The silence in the grand ballroom was heavier than any I had ever recorded in a courtroom. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of pure shock. The city's elite, mayors, council members, philanthropists, and press, were frozen, their faces a grotesque tableau of horror. Then, chaos. Cameras flashed like strobe lights. People were shouting, scrambling away from the stage as if it were contaminated. The mayor was pale, already being hustled out a side door by his security, his Citizen of the Year award now a symbol of his own catastrophic misjudgment. Malik did not go quietly. The pillar of the community vanished, and the monster I knew was unleashed. He roared, a sound of pure, cornered animal rage, trying to fight the agents. She's lying. That crazy bitch is lying. You can't prove anything. We can, Mr. Hayes, Agent Harris said, his voice bored, as he and Chin expertly subdued him. We have the Russo ledger, recovered from your construction site. We have your ledger, recovered from your safe. And we have your wife, who has just provided the most compelling testimony of my career. They dragged him out, still screaming, his $5,000 tuxedo ripped, his mask of civility gone forever, exposing the pathetic, violent fraud beneath. I stood in the sound booth for a long time, watching the room clear. I watched the press swarm the stage, taking pictures of the screen, which still showed Malik's ledger. I had done it. I had used my voice, my record, to end him. The trial was a formality. It was 2 trials, really. The first was for Malik. Facing his own meticulous, handwritten ledger of bribes, the irrefutable evidence from the Russo ledger, and my testimony, delivered not from a stenographer's chair, but from the witness box, he had no defense. He was found guilty of attempted murder, racketeering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. He will be an old, broken man before he ever sees the light of day. The second trial was for Senator Russo. With his lost ledger now in evidence, the case was airtight. The entire corrupt syndicate, which had poisoned the city for a decade, was dismantled. The resolution was complete. The antagonists were brought to justice. But what about me? I went back to the courthouse, but something had changed. I could no longer sit in the corner, silent, just recording the words of others. My silence had almost cost me my life. My silence had enabled a monster. I looked at my little black book, the one where I had meticulously recorded Malik's crimes. I had built a case for 10 years, all while never speaking a word. And I realized, this was the hidden secret. Not just the ledger, but the method. My legacy was not to be a silent witness anymore. My legacy was to teach others how to be heard. I resigned from my position as a court stenographer. I took the substantial assets from my divorce settlement, the house, the accounts, everything he had ever earned through his crimes, and I founded the Hayes Witness Project. My transformation was absolute. I was no longer a mousy, invisible woman. I was a consultant. I am now the most sought-after expert in the country for coercive control cases. I work with prosecutors, with police departments, and with victims of domestic abuse. I teach them what I learned, how to build an infallible, data-driven, unignorable case. I teach them to become their own stenographers. To record everything. Not just the violence, but the crimes. The casual financial fraud. The hidden accounts. The tax evasion. The small lies that build a foundation for the big ones. I teach them how to find the red ledger in their own lives. My foundation provides legal aid, but more importantly, it provides forensic accountants and private investigators to victims. We build the case so that when a woman, beaten and bruised, walks into a precinct like the 12th, she doesn't just have her story. She has a record. She has receipts. She has evidence that men like Officer Riley cannot, and will not, ignore. I found my new purpose. I stood at a podium last week, not in a sound booth, but on the main stage, addressing the new class of police cadets. You will see them, I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing through the auditorium. They will come to you, like I did, broken and bruised. Do not see a domestic dispute. See a witness. Do not see a hysterical woman. See a survivor who is holding the key to a much larger crime. Do not ever ask, what did you do to set him off? Ask, what evidence can we gather? Because I promise you, the pillar of the community is often the most rotten of all. I found my peace. Not in silence, but in my voice. Malik tried to erase me, to make me a silent footnote in his violent life. Instead, he made me the author of his downfall, and the voice for thousands who had none. What this story teaches us is that the most dangerous person in the world is the one who has been silent for too long. The one who watches, who listens, and who records. They are not invisible. They are just biding their time. If you believe in the power of a single voice to change the world, hit that like button. And subscribe to this channel. Because we all deserve to have our truth heard, and to have the final, victorious word. We'll see you in the next one.